Welcome to Grassroots Motorsports. My name's Tim Sutter. In the next half an hour, we're going to learn about sports cars and sports car racing. We're talking unsung heroes here, weekend warriors, people who like to autocross, race, rally, hill climb, vintage race, or just have fun with their street cars. With me today is my good buddy J.G. Pasterjack. Tell us about today's show.
We got a really cool show today, Tim. First of all, we're going to show you some cars that are built on a budget that's less than the cost of some exotic bicycles. That's the Grassroots Motorsports $1,500 challenge. After that, the budget goes up a little bit as we take a look at the appeal of vintage racing and why this sport's become so exciting at Daytona Beach, Florida. Then we're going to show you how to squeeze those last few horsepower out of your car as we visit a dyno. Finally, we take a vintage car out on the track ourselves for a little vintage race action. But no ordinary vintage car. This one belongs to rocker Brian Johnson.
Hey, that sounds great, JG. Let's get started.
$1,500 may not seem like a lot of money, but tonight the competitors in the Grassroots Motorsports $1,500 challenge are going to put their car building and their parts buying abilities to the tests as they take on the Orlando Speed World quarter-mile drag strip. The rules were very simple. Essentially, there were no rules. For a total cash outlay of just $1,500, you had to purchase, repair, and modify any car of your choice. This challenge included an autocross competition, a drag race, and, just to keep the cars from being total pieces of junk, we threw a Concours competition in there as well. Besides the 3 Grassroots staff members who built cars, 21 brave souls from as far away as Texas, Pennsylvania, and even Maryland joined us in Central Florida for this challenge. Mike, we heard you have an interesting story about how you acquired your car. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I found the car on eBay, on the internet. It was $100. I won the auction at $100, and took it home and swapped the motor.
All right, Johnny Pruitt came all the way out here from Texas. Johnny, are you going for the long drive award here you go?
First place overall.
How far was your drive out here?
8 gas stops, 2 sleep stops, about 20 hours of driving.
There's been a lot of people making a lot of noise about this $1,500 challenge. Mike Guido's been one of the loudest. Mike, what do you think your big advantage is here tonight?
Lightweight and a lot of horsepower.
How much horsepower are we talking about, if you can divulge those numbers?
Well, the little bottle down here should make it about 200 horse, and the car should weigh about 1,200 pounds.
That's a scuba tank, I assume?
That's a scuba tank. I heard there's a lake like at Moroso, so we're ready for our Moroso drive.
Any predictions tonight for you or for your competition?
If the clutch holds out, the Dead Clown Racing will win.
All right, thanks, Mike. We appreciate it. Good luck tonight. Everything that can possibly be removed from these cars before drag racing has to come out. These are not cars that have a ton of horsepower, so people are going to have to get them as light as possible. Since a lot of these cars had been completed just prior to the event, many of the competitors used their first drag strip runs just to get their cars dialed in. Without the benefit of slicks and a real suspension, too much gas at the start would just lead to wheel spin and slow quarter-mile times. This is the $1,500 challenge. These competitors didn't have a lot of budget to work with, so one of the solutions they came up with, turbocharging. Here we have a Mustang SVO, turbocharged, versus a turbocharged Datsun 280ZX. You don't have cubic inches, you pressurize. At the end of the evening, Mike Guido's Dead Clown Racing took top drag honors with a 14.1 second pass, which is about 6 seconds quicker than the average stock midget. Last night it was all about horsepower. This morning, it's all about elbow grease. These competitors in this $1,500 challenge are going to polish their cars about as good as you may see these cars for the world's strangest Concours competition. Normally, Concours are reserved for your 100-point Ferraris, your rare Bugattis, and only 12 were made, and you don't normally see this much primer in a Concours competition. But this morning, between these raindrops here, this primer is going to get polished about as shiny as you'll ever see a car in primer. We felt we needed some real professional Concours judges, so we got some. Kirk White has 30 years in the exotic car business, and he's entered cars in the world-famous Pebble Beach Concours. He was joined by Jim Kelsey, Managing Director for Daytona Beach's Classics Auto Museum. Essentially, our judges awarded points based on the cleanliness and integrity of the modifications. For example, cars didn't lose points for having gutted interiors, but they did receive a good score if the gutting was done neatly. Color-coordinated duct tape was preferred over the standard stuff as well. Kirk White, you've judged Ferrari Club Concours at the national level. Do you see anything here that's comparable?
Close, but not quite yet. But we've got quite a bit of judging to do yet.
What are you looking for mostly on these cars? Obviously, these are not show-winning cars. How are you comparing these cars?
I'd say overall what we're looking for is integrity and the effort that's been put in by the owners.
Let's talk about specific cars now.
The metallic blue Mazda was a good effort, and the man had done the paint job himself. The red Datsun 280Z, an enormous job. I mean, that was literally a pile of scrap. And the black Honda, the last one that the young man had, when he pulled the hood up, I mean, it was a good enough detailed job that it would have qualified for Pebble Beach.
Was there anything that really stood out to you guys today?
The level of energy and enthusiasm that has gone into these efforts it's utterly fantastic. The ingenuity more than the details. I mean, just the incredible ability to adapt and lift apart from here and take something from there and get this from a friend, and that's what impressed me the most. Real backyard engineering.
The judges are finishing their job up. They've been over these $1,500 cars with a fine-tooth comb, and now it's time for the final test of the weekend. That's going to be the Autocross. These cars are going to go out on that lot and test themselves against the clock on a tight, twisty, pile-on line course that's going to put their handling to the test. The goal of autocrossing is to get through the course as quickly as possible without hitting any pylons. Drivers got as many runs as they needed to get the best possible performance from their cars. Multi-time autocross national champion and all-around nice guy Danny Shields was our spec driver for the autocross. Participants had the option of having Danny take a few runs in their car as well. Well, as should be obvious, a little Florida shower came in and dampened our facility here, but it did not dampen the spirits of these competitors at all. Before I get to it, I'm going to tell you that the results are in. We've done all the math, and we've figured out who won this thing, so we're going to show you the results of the $1,500 challenge right now. After 2 dizzying days of competition, the final scores were totaled, and to no one's real surprise, the Dead Clown Racing Team's MGVC Roadster took the top honors, thanks to their dominance at the drag strip and concours. The Mini-Me minivan finished second, with Ziggy Weber's Mercury Capri rounding out the top 3. All right, Mike Guido, you and your MGVC have won the inaugural $1,500 challenge. What do you attribute this to?
A lot of teamwork, 4 guys working their butts off for 3 months, 4 kids taking off all the school that they could, and 4 months, months of that too. It was great.
With our $1,500 challenge, we looked at low-dollar cars. Today, we're at Daytona International Speedway, where we're going to look at vintage racing, where cars are a little more expensive.
Vintage racing is just like regular wheel-to-wheel road racing, but with one obvious difference. The drivers all race older vintage cars. Since there is more emphasis on the cars rather than the racing, these events tend to be lower key. Generally, the beautiful old sports cars, not the drivers, come first. Exactly what defines a vintage race car varies from region to region and club to club. Generally, any sports or muscle car from before the early 70s that is prepared the way the cars used to race is eligible. Some clubs do allow newer cars and some are stricter, only allowing early cars or making the car owner prove that their car has actual race history.
We're here with Brian Redman, a longtime vintage racer. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about the history of vintage racing?
Well, vintage racing in the United States really took off about 10 years ago. Up to that point, it was relatively quiet and relatively gentlemanly. But today, it's like any other form of racing. They're all out there, and they're out there to win.
Some of the bigger clubs are the Historic Sports Car Racing Group and the Sports Car Vintage Racing Association in the East, and the Vintage Auto Racing Association on the West Coast. Most of these groups hold events nearly every month at most of the major racetracks, and the public is usually invited. To get involved, you should first come watch a few vintage races. Before committing the time and money to go vintage racing, you need to make sure it fits your temperament and budget.
We're here with Bobby Rahal, who has just made the switch from professional racing to vintage racing. Can you tell us some of the differences between the two?
The biggest difference is there's no pressure here and it's nothing but pressure in kart, so that's the biggest difference. but I think we all do these things because we have a love for these cars, and you know, a lot of old friends here. Old cars, old friends, old lives.
There's a lot of pretty serious machinery here.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of serious machinery, and you know, some of it is, you know, some of it's probably as competitive. If they were still legal, they'd be winning the Daytona 24-hour race today. So, you know, there's a lot of potent machine and machinery, but really the main thing is everybody comes here to have a good time and relax and rejoice these cars. There's some just wonderful cars here.
If you want to try it, there are several outfits that will rent you a car and supervise your first weekend. Most of the aforementioned clubs also have schools for beginners. After the proper schooling, most clubs will let you put numbers on your vintage sports car and give it a try. But even though the cars are old, the safety gear needs to be up to date. Generally, roll bars or roll cages, safety harnesses, and fuel cells are a must. To encourage racers to bring out their older and more valuable race cars, most sanctioning bodies invoke stiff penalties for on-track incidents that result in damage to the car. Remember that you are just out there racing for a trophy that is very likely not worth as much as the Ferrari Daytona that you are dueling with. Most of the drivers work to keep the racing safe and clean, as the spectators are there to see the cars at speed and just don't care who finishes first.
The name of the game in racing is horsepower. Now, your car may not get 710 horsepower like this 396 Chevy, but in our next segment, we'll show you how to get a little bit more power from your car. Bench racing is one thing, but having the hard numbers to back things up, that's the name of the game today. That's why we're here at Atlantic Performance in sunny, usually sunny Jacksonville, Florida. This shop has a dynamometer, which is the best way to test horsepower and torque on any car, truck, or motorcycle. This is our newest project car. It's a 2000 Civic Si made by Honda. We've already added a set of Bilstein shocks as well as some Koenig burner wheels. They're wrapped by BF Goodrich CompTA tires. We're off to a good start, but we think there's a lot more we can do, and that's why we're here. So come on in, we'll go inside. I'm here with Mark Allen. He's the owner at Atlantic Performance. Mark, tell us what we're going to do first.
Well, Tim, first we're going to go ahead and get some baseline readings on our Dynojet dynamometer. We're going to be measuring the output of the torque and horsepower of the car in its stock condition. What we're going to do is have Gary go ahead and bring the car up so we can put it on the Dynojet. We're going to need to strap it down for safety. The car's going to be doing about 80 miles an hour in third gear.
Yeah, I guess the last thing we need is a car going through the wall at 80 miles an hour.
Yeah, we won't be able to do the rest of our test otherwise.
Now, Mark, take us through the process.
Okay, well, first we're going to put the inductive pickup on the number one cylinder so we can measure the RPMs. We're going to be running the car to about 8,000 RPMs. Gary, you want to go ahead and start the car, please?
So what are we looking at here, Mark?
Well, here on the monitor, you've got the dials which simulate the miles per hour and the RPMs of the engine. Okay, Gary's going to go ahead and start running the car and bring it up to third gear. And you'll be able to sit there and watch as the dials increase to show you where you're at.
All right, here he goes. So, Mark, how'd we do?
It looks like we got about 136 horsepower and 98 foot-pounds of torque.
Is that pretty standard for one of these cars?
Very consistent for the Civic Si. They range anywhere from about 135 to 139 horsepower at the wheels.
What do you think we ought to do first to put a little more power to the wheels here?
Well, I think we need to let the exhaust breathe better. What we have is a 50-state legal stainless steel CompTech exhaust system. Should give us about 3 to 5 horsepower.
Perfect. Let's put it on. We started by removing the stock system from our Honda. We then put the wrenches to our new CompTech system and found it smooth sailing. In fact, because it's designed for do-it-yourselfers like us, it features easy bolt-on parts. It took us only about half an hour to install. We then began by installing a CompTech exhaust header to match the exhaust system. The header is also made of stainless steel with a TIG-welded 4-into-2-into-1 design. The 4-into-2-into-1, or Tri-Y, is an exhaust design where the exhaust primaries are mated into 2 tubes and then step into 1 exhaust pipe. This type of design is good for increasing horsepower, but will also help the torque for around-town driving. We then concentrate on getting some nice fresh air into the engine with cold air intake. This increases power by pulling cold air from outside the warm engine compartment and directing it into the engine through this large intake pipe and filter. You don't want to suck in any air that has been hanging around this warm header.
This works because colder air is denser with more oxygen molecules. So the colder the intake air is, the more power we get. We then placed our trusty Honda back on the dyno for one last blast up the gears. Well, that sounded really good. So how'd we do this time, Mark?
Well, Tim, it looks like we picked up 10 horsepower and nearly 7 foot-pounds of torque.
Well, that's real good, Mark. We picked up nearly 10 horsepower. It only took us a few hours. We put on a Comtech header, exhaust system, cold air intake. Thanks for your help.
Sure, anytime, Tim.
You'd think that the weekends of a rock and roll star, like AC/DC lead singer Brian Johnson, would be never-ending parties full of loud music and wild groupies. Well, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. For Brian Johnson, truth is found behind the wheel of a 1964 Lotus Cortina at vintage races around the country. Brian's wife Brenda also competes in vintage events with her Austin Haley Sprite. While the Johnsons have the financial means to put almost any car on the racetrack, they chose relatively low-buck racers. We asked them their thoughts on vintage racing. All right, Brian Johnson, I know I've bought enough AC/DC records. You could afford to be driving a GT40 or a prototype car. What are you doing driving a Cortina and putting your wife in a Sprigget?
I just guess I wanted to start from the bottom. You know, I work my way up. I guess in this sport, especially HSR, you know, it's easy to buy a big car, go out there and try to go fast. But if you want to learn some of the tracks, the Cortina's the car to learn in. It's not as noisy as these big boys as well. But I just wanted to start from the bottom, work my way up, you know, and try to get a name as an able driver, you know, so people will trust you on the track, you know.
You've run in a few different series, and I know you've run Barbara Dodge. What's the appeal of vintage racing for you over another series?
Oh, it's just bags of fun. You know, I don't think I've ever had so much fun racing. The guys who race in HSR especially are just a barrel of laughs, you know, but they're serious, you know, they're not kidding when they're racing. But they'll have a beer with you afterwards and tell you what you did wrong, or if they enjoy driving with you, you know, and I have a ball with it.
Brenda Johnson, I know you've raced go-karts in the past, and now you're racing a Bug-Eye Sprite. How does this Bug-Eye compare to your go-kart?
I actually think it's a big go-kart. It actually performs really well. I mean, it turns really easy. It's a pretty simple car to drive. I mean, for someone, a rookie like myself, it wasn't a big transition. It was just like bingo, get in and go.
They've also done some Barbara Dodge. What's the appeal of vintage racing for you over another series like Barbara Dodge or even going karting?
I think it's the magic of driving these old vintage cars. You know, there's something really special for me. When I was younger, I used to always watch the boys, and they always had these little sports cars, and I was too young to drive then. And so now it's just such a joy just to be able to race them instead. You know?
We put their cars to the test at the 1999 Daytona Continental HSR event, as Brian and Brenda were kind enough to let me slip behind the wheel of these cars. This Sprite is not very powerful. It's only powered by a 1275cc engine, so all of its speed comes from the fact that it's so light. The car is so easy to place in the corner because of its light weight. Back when this car was new, they ran on Goodyear slicks or Hoosier slicks or Dunlop slicks, or whatever kind of slicks were available. Now they run on treaded street tires, and the cars are just as fast now as they were back in the 50s and 60s when they were raced. The chief mechanic for DeLuca Racing, Thomas Ransow, has set both cars up to be perfectly neutral and predictable. All right, Thomas Ransow, you prepare these cars for DeLuca Motorsports, and I had a chance to drive them, and they seem beautifully prepared. Is there a lot of maintenance that goes into these vintage cars?
There's some, yeah, depends on how good the weekend goes, but it's not too bad once everything holds back, together.
Which one comes back and needs more work?
Brenda's car got a smaller engine and it needs more maintenance.
Now, if someone was thinking about going vintage racing, are either of these two cars a good choice for somebody who's just starting out in the sport? Are they pretty easy to maintain and run?
Definitely the Bug-Eye is a good starter car. And the Lotus, it's a little bit harder to drive, but they're both fun cars to drive.
But probably the biggest difference between these modern vintage race cars and their ancestors is brakes. 40 years of brake pad technology and increased chemistry technology has given these cars a stopping ability. It's just like any other race car today. It gives the driver a lot of confidence. But if you made me pick one over the other, boy, I'll tell you what, you cut the top off, get that wind in your face, 100 miles an hour feels like 200 miles an hour, I'll take this Bug-Eye. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
Well, that's our show for today. We've seen the high end, and we've even shown you how to build a car for as little as $1,500. I hope you've enjoyed the show. For Grassroots Motorsports, I'm Tim Suttard. Thanks for watching.
Support brands that support Grassroots Motorsports. Get your chemical solutions from CRC Industries. Visit crcindustries.com to learn more.